Well, as you know, we have a very professional speaker here who is used to commanding a classroom. George Webster was a teacher for many years, and I think this is going to be a very scholarly presentation. He's from Oakville, Ontario. It is Oakville, isn't it?
Correct.
And
home of Ford.
Home of Ford, is that right?
Yeah.
And he has been a friend of the center since the day it opened in 1999. He's been here at all of our activities and been a big supporter of ours, and we're delighted he's going to speak. Now, George has been coming to Watkins Glen since 1959. I think you were about 4 that year, weren't you? And he also was present at every U.S. Grand Prix. Now, you might wonder how George got into this, and he'll probably tell you. Land speed records are something that we all like in motorsport, but many of us have been to road races, and we're aware of land speed. And George was originally interested in road racing, and he since he retired from teaching, since the 70s, he's been a motoring journalist. A number of magazines he's written for, Auto Week Canada. He's covered NASCAR and CART for other publications, PRN Ignition, National Speed Sport News, and the website Go Racing Inc. He's also been a photographer. He's very, very knowledgeable in this field. And I asked George, now how did you get interested in land speed? Now this sort of ties in with what we're doing at the center next month. He got interested in model cars, but realizing there were thousands and thousands of model cars, his interest turned to land speed cars because there weren't so many. It wasn't going to clutter up his house, and he wanted to keep his wife happy. And I know some guys, though, I say, my God, you got 1,200 model cars. How does your wife tolerate it? Well, you know, those model cars are worth $800 to $1,000 to $1,500, so the wives say, fine, keep those, I'll have them when you pass on. And he started to read more about land speed. So when we talked about this presentation, I said, "Oh, that's such a great field. What aspect are you going to talk about?" He said, "Well, if you give me 4 days, I can start at 1900." And George is going to concentrate on what happened after World War II and quickly go on to the 60s. Is that right? And there's been so much in that area, and I know all of us are interested in it, and I don't know how many are experts in it. George said, "You know, I'm not an expert, but the guy is thorough. He is a great researcher, and it brings to mind what an expert is. An expert is somebody that nobody can question." I had to talk to 100 judges who came to town, and we went up around the race course in 2 school buses at great speed, and then I went up to the press room and I talked to these 100 judges about the history of road racing in America and Watkins Glen, and I did not have one contradiction from them. Now, I would never go before that group and talk to them about how to run their courtroom or the rule of law or the Constitution. So there may be 1 or 2 of you who may have a question or two from George, and he's expecting it, and he'll be very glad to hear from you. But I did just mention that we are having a model car show 11th through the 13th, and we're going to have a panel of experts, including Dave. Where's Dave? Dave Wild is going to be on the panel. And that will be very good. Those are always on Saturday. Incidentally, I'm going to ask all of you, have you gotten your Racing Archives newsletter? Good, good. Sometimes Florida and some distant precincts don't get them because we do them from bulk mail, but we have a whole schedule of events. On May 10th, we're going to have the Great Sam Posey. You all saw the Formula 5000 car out there, and the owners, the Drazings from Milwaukee, are going to come out, and there's going to be a panel on that Formula 1 car on Saturday, May 10th. And then Murray Smith, well-known race driver, and he's currently chairman of the Lime Rock Historic Festivals. He's going to be here on June 21st. And then Kerry Agajanian is going to be here July 19th. Kerry, Auto Week recently said he's probably the most influential guy in racing. I did not know that, but I remember his father, J.C. Agajanian, who was a big power at Indianapolis during the 40s and the 50s and into the 60s, and he'll be here July 19th. Then we have some other programs coming on. I think October we're going to have the Milwaukee Mile, and we have a couple others that we haven't firmed down the date. But I'm always glad to see this group. As you know, it's people like you who keep us going. This is my PBS moment. This is why we can have these programs. And I want to mention last year we went down to the Simeon Museum. And when Dr. Simeon came up here, he could not believe that we put these programs on without asking for admission price. He always does. That was such a successful bus trip we left from the center that we are planning another tour. And this year, I believe it's August 2nd. It is August 2nd, Saturday. We're getting buses, and if we need 2 or 3, we will. It'll probably be 1 or 2. We're going to the Saratoga Museum, and it will coincide with their very special exhibit of sports and exotic cars. And we'll be getting you more information on that and all the prices. So kind of mark that August 2nd. Everybody who went to the Philadelphia trip had fun. Now, George, at your expense, I've talked and talked and talked, and we do want you to come back over to the center. George, are you planning an intermission here? Or are you going to go straight?
Yeah, I am. Enough to stretch your arms.
And we'll lock the doors and nobody can get out, but I'm sure you'll want to.
The best part comes after the intermission.
Good. That's the way to do it. Professor?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? JC's just touched on something that I had thought about mentioning, and I will now that he's reminded me of it. And that is that the center exists and operates only because of it receives contributions from people like us. And this does sound like PBS, but and he made the point that these presentations are offered without admission. And it's always occurred to me that that this is worth something to you. You come out, and I try whenever I come to one of these to reach in, write something in my checkbook and hand over a bit of a contribution on a regular basis. And just, most of you, I'm sure, give contributions to the center. But when you come out to a presentation like this, it's a time for you to think about that and think, well, maybe it's a time for me to give another small donation or contribution to the center in support of their work, in support of these, plus all the other worthwhile efforts of the center. It costs a lot of money. The band of supporters in the big picture isn't all that big. We're it, and we need to get behind it. End of commercial. Second, this is the poster they put together for my speech, and it's based on a picture that I sent to them, and it kind of tells you a bit about the evolution of my plan for the presentation. As JC said, my original idea was to do the land speed records. Quickly, within a moment, I realized that would never work, and I thought, well, maybe you could split it into 3 parts: 2 before World War II and 1 after World War II. And that was my idea, that the most relevant to us would be the part that we lived through, or many of us lived through, the post-World War II part. So originally that was my plan, and the original publicity for this gave that as the title of the presentation. Well, I realized once I got into it that I could never do that justice. So I trimmed it down to the title you see there, The Battle for the Land Speed Record in the 60s, Campbell, the Arfons and Breedlove. But the picture is Gary Gablich's car, which is from 1970 approximately. So that's from an earlier version of the speech. So there's the title again. Now, I'm at Watkins Glen, and I don't think I can do a talk about the land speed record without at least mentioning Glenn Curtis from Hammondsport. I assume everybody knows where Hammondsport is. It's over towards the, what do they call it, the 390 now? But it's not very far from here. And he started the Curtis Aircraft Company from here. And there's a museum over there, a Curtis Museum. In 1907, there was a speed week at Ormond Beach, which is just up a little bit, just the north end of Daytona Beach. And he had a V8, this V8 motorcycle with an aircraft engine in it. And he was timed at a speed of 136.364 mile per hour in the mile. Unfortunately, it wasn't an official timing. So it's an unofficial land speed record, and whenever you get these unofficial records, they're controversial whether you should recognize them or not. He wasn't able to come daylight the next day when the official timers were there. He broke something in the engine, and he got that repaired, and then the chassis, the frame of the bike got bent, and he wasn't ever able to do an official run. So this was considered to be the fastest speed on land, it's fastest speed of anything at that time in 1907. Car, boat, airplane. And as a motorcycle record, as such, as an unofficial, it stood for about over 10 years. Anyway, that's the local reference to the land speed record. And there is, and a reproduction of that bike is in the museum here, and the original is in the Smithsonian. This period, post-war to 66, is basically involves the Bonneville Salt Flats. And I'm sure you all know that the Bonneville Salt Flats is the remains of an old salt lake by, no surprise, Salt Lake City, Utah, to the west of Salt Lake City. And so there's the sign. You can't read anything but Bonneville Salt Flats, I guess. And here's an overhead picture of the salt flats. Now, there was something I was going to say here about the salt flats at that time. What was I going to say? Well, it's gone. This is a picture from the 50s. I know what I was going to say. 1949. There had been runs on the Bonneville Salt Flats pre-war. The most notable was when Malcolm Campbell decided that Daytona Beach was not suitable for him to try to go any faster. One of the big problems, if you've been to Daytona, there's piers that go out, and he had to shoot sort of through the eye of the needle underneath the piers to get enough distance. And the beach is sometimes good, sometimes not so good, because every time the tide goes out, you get a new beach. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, and you need a long run. So Bonneville had been used before that, so he went out to Bonneville in 35, and at Bonneville was able to break 300 miles an hour. And there were a number of other speed runs, particularly Easton and Cobb on the Bonneville Salt Flats in the 30s. After the war, and actually I guess it precedes the war, there were hot rodders, what we now would call hot rodders, in California who were running on Lake Muroc, which is Edwards Air Force Base now. So it's the same thing. It's just the government took it over. So it's now called Edwards Air Force Base. This SCTA had actually been in existence prior to World War II. So they ran there, and then they decided to come out to Bonneville in 49, and they ran a week, or speed week, late August, and they've been running it, a speed week, there ever since. And so they were making runs at that time. Other people made runs over the years as well at that, but those are two kind of separate things. Wrong point. So here's a picture, probably from Speed Week in about 1950 or it could have been 1950. There's nothing newer than 1950, early 50s. So the next thing I want to talk about is the question of official land speed record. I've already mentioned that Curtis's record wasn't official. It wasn't official. His wasn't official because it wasn't officially timed. It was timed by a buddy of his with a stopwatch, and there wasn't, it wasn't officially observed. So the FIA, and I assume you all recognize the FIA is considered to be the ultimate authority in automobile racing. Doesn't, particularly in the United States here, not all automobile racing comes under the FIA, but FIA considers itself to be the ultimate authority. You have to have rules. If you're going to, we're talking about superlatives here, the fastest. And you have to have rules so that everybody's playing by the same, on the same playing field. So if, for example, I said, who is the oldest person in this room? Well, we know what the rule there is, right? The rule is birth date. And if we went past birth date, it'd be minute of birth. But we wouldn't have to be in a big debate about what the rule is. However, if I said to you, what is the fastest drag racing record? What is the rule? Could somebody tell me what the rule is? Standing start over a quarter of a mile. How many agree with that? How many agree with standing start over a quarter mile? Anybody know why that's wrong? No, I don't think so. There are eighth of a mile, but standing start quarter mile used to be the standard. Al knows.
Yeah, I believe that IMRRC has now started recognizing 1,000-foot records.
So now it's 1,000 feet. So you can't compare the old quarter mile record with the current 1,000-mile record. Not every class is 1,000 feet. It's just the fastest ones. And it's a safety question because they don't go as fast at the end of 1,000 feet instead of 1,320, right? So it's to get the speeds under control. And so the current NHRA records for those fastest classes are based on 1,000 feet. Well, that's the rule. There's nothing magic about the rule. NHRA is the authority. They set the rule. And it used to be a quarter mile. But those old quarter mile records can't be compared to the 1,000-foot. So that's an example of how you have to have a rule, and you have to know what the rule is, and everybody has to run to the same rule. And if you're in another place where they're running eighth of a mile, then that's the rule. But the NHRA, well, we've been over that. So here's the FIA rules, and the first one is the most important in this discussion. A car has 4 wheels or more, and it's driven by at least 2 of those wheels. Transmits the power to the ground. It also has to be steered by 2 wheels. It has to be timed over a measured mile or a kilometer. And this is a funny thing that you can have 1 mile distance or kilometer distance, and there doesn't seem to be a hard and fast rule. Which one? You sort of take whatever you want. England and the U.S. has been at the forefront of land speed records, and we in both countries you still talk in terms of miles. So the focus is on the mile distance rather than the kilometer distance. But you can set a speed record over a kilometer and claim that as a land speed record. The speed is based on the average of 2 runs in opposite directions. And you have to complete both the runs within an hour. Now, if you go to the SCTA Speed Week in August, they do 2 runs. And I think they do them in the same direction. But they do the second one the next day. So there's no way those runs can count as FIA records from the SCTA Speed Week. In addition to that, they average the 2 speeds, the speed of the first run and the speed of the second run. And most of you probably did high school physics and know that that's not the way you calculate average speed. You have to take the total time and divide it by the total distance, not the average of the 2 speeds. So here you have an organization that is blissfully using an incorrect method to average the speeds. But that's their rule. And it doesn't matter that they're wrong, that's their rule. The FIA uses the correct method of averaging the speeds, but they have another thing that I stumbled on, that they have a cockamamie way of rounding off their numbers. So, but that's the way they do it. That's their rule. Everybody has to work to that rule. This during this era becomes a kind of an important topic. So that's why I've spent a bit of time on it. Okay. Post-war. Pre-war, John Cobb set the fastest time. He was convinced that he could go over 400 miles an hour, and the clock had kind of run out on him before the war. So he reconditioned the car, got some mobile sponsorship, came back to Bonneville in 1947, was aiming for 400. He did one run over 400, but the average ended up at 394. So that became the new goal. And so for the rest of this, land speed record, 400 miles an hour is the goal. You got to beat 400 miles an hour, basically. If you did in those days, you had to do 1% better to get a new record. So I think 1% would actually be over the 400. And here's some more pictures of the car. Two monster engines, actually World War I V12 engine. And there's two of them in there. Here it is with the skin on it. Here it is on the Salt. Now, in 1952, he was trying to set a water speed record on Loch Ness and was killed. And there's his tombstone. Okay. During the 50s, somebody talked to me about the Healey's, and there's one of the movies I'm showing across the way deals with the BMC, the MGs and the Healey's and the Sprites. Runs during the 60s. I was going to incorporate it in the talk, but I didn't. For reasons of time, it got chopped out. There were obviously all these SCTA speed weeks, other people making runs, other independent people. So BMC came over 3 or 4 times, Donald Healey, Phil Hill, Sterling Moss. Those of us who are Canadians probably remember Ed Levins. Ed Levins was involved in that. Do you remember Ed Levins? You're the only other Canadian here, and you don't remember. He was the BMC dealer in London at that time, and is now a VW dealer. Well, he didn't set speed records. Ed Levins was part of a team that set long distance speed records. So we get into the 60s, and finally people start challenging that 400 mile an hour mark. And late in this, Art Arfons said, this is like playing Russian roulette. I set a new time and to Breedlove, and you'll come back and set a higher time. And I guess then I'll have to come back, and then you'll have to come back until one of us gets killed. And it kind of played out like that, as you'll see. So the whole thing is playing Russian roulette, where one guy is topping the next guy. And they're all at risk. And you'll see there's some fatalities along the way. So Donald Campbell, these are the players, the 8 players. Donald Campbell, the classic, he's son of Malcolm Campbell, who set the records in the 30s. He went the classic rate. He read the rule book and followed it to the letter. Thought if I use a turbine engine instead of a piston engine, I'll get a lot more power, 4,000 horsepower, but it's a 4-wheel drive. Tremendous amount of effort. Kind of the same people who did the BRM 16-cylinder project. You remember how well that went in F1, right? Kind of the same people. Tremendous amount of industry involved, tremendous amount of money involved, tremendous amount of everything involved. And there he is with his little mascot, so English. Here's the picture of the car when it was at Bonneville in 1960. Mickey Thompson, the classic American hot rodder. Hot rodder, I'm sure you all know Mickey Thompson's name. Hot rodder, drag racing, speed runs at Lake Murdoch and at Bonneville. Had a lot of experience in that. He built a car he called the Challenger 1, and he tried for Chryslers because he thought the Hemis were the best way to go, and he got Pontiac to give him 4 big Pontiac engines. Probably not quite as good a choice, but that's what he had. 4-wheel drive again. There's a drawing of it. Very low, very streamlined car. Craig Breedlove, one of the biggest names in there, another hot rodder from LA. He built a car up called the Spirit of America, which had a J47 jet engine in those days. This is the late 60s. They were scrapping the early generation of aircraft, jet aircraft, and these were available at the scrapyards. I didn't know this, but these guys knew that where they could find them at scrapyards, and they would go to the scrapyards and they would get these engines for $500. And in one case, they I don't know, if you drive down to Erie on the I-90, you see a jet aircraft up on the fighter up on the pylon there. Well, there was one being installed in Oregon, and one of these guys found that out, and he says, you know, it'll be very heavy to mount that plane up there with the engine in it. I'll do you a big favor. I'll take the engine out of there, and I'll take it away for you even, and you won't have to build as strong a pylon to build it on. So he got a brand new, a complete engine, undamaged, all the ancillaries, for basically for doing them a favor to take this scrap away. As you'll see, the J47 had a lot of power. It's 5,000 pounds thrust, and it's the three-wheeler. So on 2 counts, there's no way he can get an FIA record. It's thrust, not wheel-driven, and it's only 3 wheels. Later, in '65, he built up a second-generation car, which had a 3 times more powerful engine than the J79, and it was a 4-wheeler, and he set a record in that. Here's the original Spirit of America with no rear fin. So that's at the original press lots. Notice there's no cowling over the back wheels. That was because it was a press launch and they didn't have the car finished. Now, Walt Arfons from Cleveland, from Akron, he and his brother Art got into, they actually had a feed mill where you'd take in we used to call it chop. You'd take in your grain and they would grind it up into chop to feed your animals, and they'd mix in supplements. Before we all had grinders at home in the farm. And that was their business. And they also had a hardware side to it, probably like a new generation, a successor to they probably had a blacksmith shop originally. Well, they got into drag racing with the V12 aircraft engines, like the Allison, and we're doing demonstration runs with the Allison engine. That's about a 1,500 horsepower engine, and we're doing that. And then they got into doing it with jet engines, and it was kind of a lot. And I don't know, do any of you remember that era when those big jet engine dragsters were out? They were just demonstration runs, basically. I think they would go, they'd get paid money by the promoter, and they would go and do it. And so these involved into taking them to the Salt Flats and seeing how far they could go if they could really let them out. So Arfons had 2 different versions. He had the Wingfoot Express, which was an evolution of the drag strip car, and Tom Green drove that. Arfons had a heart attack, or supposedly he had some kind of problem and decided he shouldn't drive. So he had Tom Green drive the Wingfoot Express. Later on, he went to a rocket-powered car, and his Bobby Totro, you see in the photo here, drove that. Here's the Wingfoot Express with Tom Green that's Arfons in the middle, the back. Art Arfons, his younger brother, was working with him, and they were building these drag strip cars. But I think that because it was a promotional thing, the fix was in, of course. And the fix was supposed to be that Walt won. And secondly, that once, however they were staging this supposed competition, that once Walt had become dominant, had won, that Art was supposed to back off. Well, I guess Art was didn't buy into the fix, and so Art kept competing with him, and that seems to me to be the falling out. At any rate, there was a falling out, and they basically never spoke again. So even though they had their houses were side by side in Akron, they basically never spoke again, and they just went and did their own thing. I think that's part of what fueled their rivalry on the Salt. Now, he started out with what he called the Anteater, which was clearly a drag racing evolution. It had the V12 Allison, 28 liters, turbocharged or supercharged, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,600 horsepower. But that was really a drag racing car. And then he went from there to another drag racing car with a J47 jet. And eventually he was the first to get the J79 jet, which was much more powerful. And all the series, you see that was Green Monster number 17 actually, they were all called Green Monster. That was in the era the fastest car. Here he is with the Green Monster in 65. Then there were the Summers brothers, Bob and Bill. They were hot rodders, classic Bonneville speed merchants. Bob was the driver, and they built a 4-engined car with 7-liter Hemis, Chrysler Hemis. And so they showed up in the middle of it and kind of created some excitement because they were quite different. They were in the middle of all these jet cars. There's a picture of the Goldenrod. I picked that picture to show you how low, how small and how low that car is compared to the other ones. There was a fellow by the name of Athol Graham, a mechanic in Salt Lake City. I think his wife's name was Zelda. He had a car similar to the Anteater with a V12 Allison. There's a picture of it there, enclosed cockpit. This Dr. Nathan Ostich, always seemed to be referred to as Dr. Nathan Ostich, a physician from LA. He had a J47 jet, which he had in this, what he called the flying caduceus. Caduceus is the doctor's symbol with the snakes around it. Notice there's the wheels are exposed there. There's a driver by the name of Glenn Leisure shown on the right here. The owner in the center, Romeo Paladames, he had a J47 jet car called the Infinity. It looks pretty crude, but notice he had the wheels faired in, and that's the cockpit right out the front. That's the drag racing style. So now we're ready for the year-by-year chronology. Those 8 guys. 1959. Mickey Thompson shows up with this really pretty car, the Challenger. They got up to 363. Remember, 400 is the goal. So the fact that it's only one way doesn't matter. He's not fast enough. Notice that there's no lumps on the hood there. Athol Graham shows up. He does 344. Not even as fast. That's with the Allison engine. Pretty crude looking car. This is the correct picture. Not painted. 1960, Athol Graham comes back. He had the car painted red, but you wouldn't know it there. That's what was left of it after he flipped it a number of times, and he really didn't have any proper roll cage or seat belts or anything. And that was the end of the line for Athol Graham, but not for the car. Here's Ostich. He showed up, and well, he's even slower. He 237, nowhere near 400. Arfons shows up in his Anteater, open cockpit, 223. Again, nowhere near 400. And there's the picture of the whole car. It looks kind of, other than that funny seat out at the front, it looks kind of good, but he wasn't getting enough speed out of it. Thompson comes back, 1960. And he comes back at, I'm working from all those books you see on the other side. So as much as I can, I've given you dates. But it was Speed Week, the end of August in 1960. He shows up. He did a 354. I think it was one way. Again, nowhere near 400. And there's the picture. Oh, this one you can see the intakes for the superchargers. There you can see a couple of the superchargers mounted. The next week, Ostriches comes back, 259. Nowhere near 400. But Thompson, that basically the same week, the end of 4 days later, he's back, and he hits 406.6 miles per hour. Better than 400. Meets the FIA rules. Wheel-driven car, 4 wheels. Great. Unfortunately, when he turned around and came back, he never completed the run. So he gets out of the car and he says, I broke a drive shaft. And every book but one reports it that way. I broke a drive shaft. Well, if he just broke a drive shaft, why didn't he fix it and do the run the next week? Well, he didn't. One author, the most recent author, and the one I think has done the best job, says that he actually blew an engine. And that he just told the reporters that he broke a drive shaft not to embarrass Pontiac. And Pontiac, I don't think, were giving him any more support. And that was kind of the end of it. Anyway, he didn't have another engine to drop in there. And I think that's the reason why he only did one way. You'll see when I show you the videos that Goodyear, blows all the trumpuses for this 406.6, but it's not an FIA record. It's not a two-way record. So it's nothing. You wouldn't know it when you see the video. The video was supposed to be in there. So Bonneville, Campbell shows up, 50 vehicles, huge entourage, like an invading army. He goes out on the salt. They think he got up to about 300 miles per hour. The car lost control, flipped over, car was written off. He was lucky to survive. Project was done. All that money, all that BRM-style money, all those British companies. And it was embarrassing because you've got Thompson, as you'll see, he's there with a station wagon and a trailer. And you've got Campbell with a whole entourage, people in uniform, military people in uniform, everything. And he just goes out and wrecks the car. He looked like it was really embarrassing. And now he's kind of got a new record because even though Thompson didn't beat the old record, he kind of did. So there's the car. Wheels ripped off. That car's done. It's junk. But look at, even in that picture, you're seeing cars that have clearly been shipped over from England. So 61. Arfons shows up at Speed Week. He does 313 in the old Anteater. Nothing special. That year the salt was bad. What happens? I should talk about the salt. In the winter time that rains and the water comes up, and then the water evaporates and it comes down and it gives you a new flat surface. It comes summer. And that's why the speed week's in August, because once you get to August, then you've got the surface. And the surface will last until the rains come. Well, this time the rains came early September. And that was it. The salt went soft and rough, and they just couldn't do any more runs. So that year, basically, 61, the thing got rained out. I think 2013, there's the thing called the Bonneville Nationals in October, and the Bonneville Nationals in October were just wiped out for the same reason. At any rate, 61 was a lost year. So we come to 62. Well, Thompson decided he's coming back. He's got another engine, I guess. In the meantime, he's been doing some drag racing on the water. He's had a crash. He's broken his back. He's had a whole bunch of vertebrae fused. So we don't know quite why, whether it was the rough course or his broken back or something wrong with the car. He tried to blame it on the car, but he couldn't get up to speed. And that's the end. That's the end of the line for Thompson and speed records. I'm sure you all know that there's a lot more story to Thompson. after that, but not here in the Salt Flats. Ostage is back. He gets up over 300 miles an hour, we think. Wheel was torn off. That's the end of it. He's got to go back and fix the car. Here's Arfons in his Cyclops. This is a drag strip car. Look at that fake rocket on the side. You know, that's not for speed. That's just for the drag, you know, just for you guys at the drag race to say, wow, look at that. But it's just a fake rocket on the side. Open cockpit at the front. The Cyclops, because he had a headlight in the front, because the shutdown areas of the drag strips sometimes weren't very well lit. And he's just brought it out. He got 330, which isn't anything special, but it is the fastest ever for an open cockpit car, whatever that is. In speed records, people claim all kinds of speed records. We're trying to talk about the absolute here. Breedlove shows up. He's got his car ready, 62. He shows up. The car's undrivable. He can't control the car. He can't keep it on course. He can't steer it. They were steering it by having 2 brake pedals, one for each of the back wheels. So that was basically the method of steering it. After that, there's a little fin at the front that was supposed to steer it. It just didn't work. And Breedlove went out and didn't get going very fast at all and said, that car's undrivable. Well, the designer, Ron Shapel, said, the problem isn't the car, it's you. You're chicken. And a tremendous conflict arose between Breedlove and Shapel. Tremendous conflict. And Shapel got all the volunteers, it was all volunteers, who were working on the car on side with him. And you read about it now, you think, I don't know why the project didn't just fold at that point. I think the reason it didn't fold was that at the very end of the week, they found that there was a bad problem with the bearing at the front, and the front wheel was kind of flopping this way, like that. And there was another problem with the steering, that there was, the way the steering was set up, the wheel didn't turn as much as they thought it was. And so they demonstrated at the very end of the week that they could go faster. But remember, you only have you rent the salt for a week, and at the end of your week somebody else gets the salt. And the weather can come in and you can get chopped off. So he ran out of time. But now Goodyear had seen the potential, and Goodyear really got on side, and I guess Breedlove spent about 3 months sitting in boardrooms meeting with engineers from Goodyear, and they worked out a redesign of the car. The fin at the back and front wheels, made that front wheel steering, abandon the rear wheel brake. So getting ready for next year. Glenn Leisure had Infinity, that fatal crash. So that's 2 fatal crashes, right? Here's the remains of it. People seem kind of incensed about this. I guess they towed this up by the highway, dropped it there, and it may still be there. Every time you come in to do a speed run, you see the wreckage of this car from this fatal accident. Good way to start off your week at the Salt. But there it is. That's a J-47 rocket. Now, this is the big development. In November, Art Arfons, who had that Cyclops drag strip car, found a J-79 jet engine. And this has 3 times the thrust of those J-47s. Well, power is the name of the game, isn't it? Now, he was working on it, and he discovered that it was scrap. It was a scrap engine. It had ingested something, maybe a bolt or a wrench or a rock. Anyway, he had ingested something, and a bunch of the blades had been broken. So he took it apart, took the blades out, took out the damaged blades, sort of moved them around so they were balanced. They weren't 100%, not all the blades were there, but he put them in balanced. He got it balanced up so it'd run. He calls GE and says, you got a manual for that engine? I got a J79. You got a manual for that? Next day he gets a call from the government saying, what do you do with this engine? This is a classified engine. Nobody outside the government, outside the military is supposed to have one of these. We're sending a truck up there to pick it up right now. So he kind of just ignored them, and anyway, he managed. He built the engine, got it going, and eventually other seals, you'll see, some other J79s trickled onto the market from various scrap dealers. But he was the first, and he basically got an engine that was, I guess what had happened was they had written it off as not airworthy, so they just scrapped it. And he got it for $500 from a dealer, and I think eventually he got 2 others. And I think he actually had a total of 3 that he used to cannibalize for parts. And he said he had $5,000 total in the 3 engines, in cost, obviously not in time. Now, 63. Now we're over into 63. The season in Australia, and Campbell, after his bad experience in Bonneville, said, "Oh, the salt's no good," and that's true. The salt is degrading. The length of the salt run gets less, and as I've already told you, if it rains, then you can lose the season like they did in '61. So he said, "I'm going to do a search around the world," and he ended up in Australia. Remember, this is a Commonwealth country, so I think that was probably another incentive for them to go to Australia. So they went to this place called Lake Eyre. I want to say Lake Erie, but it's Lake Eyre or Lake Eyre, which was way, way out in the middle of the wilderness, of the outback. And we're going to go there. This picture I found in a book, and it's odd because there's no fin on that, but it's got the Australian flag on it. So this must have been at a car show or in England before it got sent out to Australia. And that's a BRM in the front. So there's the BRM connection again. It's like I don't know, it's like a bad omen. But there it is, all set to go to Australia. So he went out to Australia in '63, and despite this Lake Eyre supposedly not having had any rain in human memory, it rained, and the whole season was rained out. They were lucky. They didn't lose it was flooded so much. They were lucky that the car didn't get flooded. They only just barely got it loaded onto a trailer and got it out on a high ground before the floods came. Here's a picture of them loading it on the trailer to try to get it out off the salt there. So come later, July is a bit early at Bonneville, but there's Walt Arfons. Now he's got his drag strip car. You see the cockpit of the front, the jet engine. He used a J46. I'm not expert on these aircraft engine, but that's a Westinghouse engine. Similar in power, maybe a little bit more power than a J47G. Anyway, he, for whatever reason, probably because that's what the scrap dealer had this J46. And he enclosed the cockpit, which seems like a good idea to me, and enclosed the front wheels. So he got over 300 miles an hour, but what good is that? Breedlove, now he's back, new rear fin, and the front wheel steering, and he did some test runs on the salt in July. There he is standing probably back in California, posing in front of the car, probably taking a picture from the top of his house. Here he is, August 5th, '63. This is an important turning point. August 5th, '33. Remember, land speed record has stood since Cobb's in '47 at just under 400 miles an hour. He does one run at 388. He does the other run at 428.37, which gives him a 407.45 mile per hour average, over 400 miles per hour. This is a big event, a really big event in this chronology. But it's not an FIA land speed record. 3 wheels, thrust engine, it's not FIA. However, the FIM, the motorcycle equivalent, said, you got 3 wheels, you're a motorcycle. You belong to us. We don't have a problem with thrust engines. We'll give you the land speed record. So this is the thing, you know, really question it. Who cares whether it's FIA or not, right? Particularly those of you Americans. As a Canadian, I'm kind of feel caught in the middle of this, but you Americans, who cares? He beat Cobb. He's the fastest in the world, and so they're saying in the eyes of the world he had the land speed record. So there's Campbell back in Australia, fighting away, struggling on Lake Erie, not getting any speed run, having spent millions and millions. Now Breedlove has beat that record, and I remember the feeling like, well, what a loser that Campbell is. That's it. You know, Breedlove's done it, and he has such that. This car is so beautiful on top of everything else. At least in my opinion, it's the most beautiful of all the cars. Here's Petrali showing, he's the USAC guy, showing Breedlove his timing. Well, later on, a guy by the name of Henry Malbach had rebuilt the city of Salt Lake. It's now named the Graham Special. He only reached 293 miles per hour, so that's kind of useless. I think that was more had to do with his relationship with Graham's widow than anything else. But that's probably for another time and place. Ostrich shows up with his car. He can only get it up to 350 miles per hour, even though Breedlove with the same engine had gone over 400. Ostrich can only get up to 350 miles per hour. Perhaps the open wheels were creating more drag. Perhaps this junk engine wasn't as good as Breedlove's junk engine. Whatever, he couldn't get it. He couldn't come close to Breedlove's speed. And I should maybe at this point say, I think most of you realize that when you're talking about top speed, that as to increase speed, the drag increases exponentially, not linearly. So if you go twice as fast, you have four times the drag. So it increases exponentially. So as you get going faster and faster, you hit a wall. So the difference between 350 and 407 is huge. It's not just like that percentage difference in the speed. It's a huge difference. So he's just nowhere near. And that's why these cars with the big, huge thrust engines were good cars because they had a lot of power. But this one never worked and he gave up. So Malbach comes back. He crashes at about 300 miles per hour. That was it. Give up. So 64 is the first of the two big years. Campbell's goes back to Lake Erie, try again. Once again, rain. How unlucky can this guy be? Course is soft. Now April's the season for him. And they frig around, and they're basically on the verge of giving up. The season is pretty well run out. Again, look at all the logistics there. Season is basically given out. And he says, I'm going to do one last run. Going to make one last attempt. So he goes out and he does 403.1 mile per hour. Now, remember, Breedlove was not FIA recognized. This is faster than Cobb's speed. So he's got the FIA land speed record. Well, as they say, that and a buck might buy him a cup of coffee. The interesting thing at that time was in the U.S. that it was like ho hum. Who really cares? And whereas in Britain they were waving the flag like crazy. Whoa! And when I show you the clips, you'll see that sense. You'll see how much they wave the flag over this 403. And as it and Breedlove doesn't exist. Okay, Walt Arfons comes back with that Wingfoot Express. This time he gets up faster than Breedlove. Thrust engine, remember. So it's not an FIA record, but he sets a new speed record that's recognized, by the American public, by USAC, but who's going to quibble? Arfons comes back. Now he's there with his J79. This is the powerhouse. This is just a monster engine with 4 wheels strapped onto it. That's it. And a little cockpit on the side. Actually, this is a dummy to balance out the actual driver cockpit on the other side. So he gets up. Remember, Walt got 413 and got this unofficial LSR. Art gets to 434, again thrust, so nobody's recognizing it, but except nobody but everybody, but the eyes of the world, he's the land speed record. 2 days later, he has a blown tire, as you see, and so that ended his season. The car didn't crash. You're saying that's not a very good advertisement for Firestone? Yeah, kind of. So Breedlove comes back. There's October the 7th. His week on the salt ends. Breedlove gets the salt. On October the 13th, he does a 468 mile per hour average speed. Now that is a FIM, because it's three-wheeler, land speed record. The next day he goes out, and on the second run, he loses his chutes. He can't brake. He ends up here in a dike of salt water. But he set the right. But he had a recorded speed. So he set his time speed of average 526, which was an FIM motorcycle land speed record. The car is destroyed. Now, if you go to Chicago to the Science and Technology Museum, you'll see the car there because Goodyear paid him to rebuild it enough to put it on a display. And it's still there in Chicago. At about the same time, the FIA each year has an annual meeting of all the member clubs. ACUS is the U.S. club. In Paris, I think it's always in Paris. And they set the rules for the next year. And at that time, they recognized reality, that they were looking like fools, and said, okay, what we're going to do is we're not going to change the rules, we're going to add to the rules. So we still have the rules, as they always were, but we're going to add another category called special vehicles. And these special vehicles don't have to be driven by wheels, so thrust driven. They have special vehicles thrust driven. So that could be rocket, it could be jet. Otto Anzon, who was a young kid, a protege of Athol Graham, worked on rebuilding the city of Salt Lake. They rebuilt it, and he did a speed, but not a very good speed, and then he died of leukemia. I think in Salt Lake City, this was a big one of those ongoing newspaper stories. But other than that, he didn't do much. So we're in 64. So here's the thing to remember. October 14, Breedlove has set a land speed record over 500 miles per hour. Whoop-de-doo, whoop-de-doo. You'll see over there's a great big model of the car, about this big. Goodyear commissioned this model, and the idea was they're going to sell it in all the Goodyear stores across America. And the box says, Breedlove has set the new land speed record, 526.277 miles per hour, fastest man in the world. October the 14th, right? Rush it into production. In those days, we made things in the U.S. So they get into production, and I've got one of them. October 25, 2 weeks later, Art comes back with his green monster, with the big J76 jet. See how it's just a jet engine with four wheels. He comes back with that. He hits 536. And now FIA recognizes the thrust. So it is an FIA record. So where's Breedlove's record? Well, when you see the video, you'd never know that this had played. You'd think that Breedlove is still the fastest man in the world on the 64 speed. Anyway, Breedlove overcomes. So supposedly they abandoned plans to sell that model, and I bought my model. Paid a premium price for it on the basis that this is going to be worth a lot of money one day. Well, I think they're rare. Nobody cares. And I paid $200 for it about 20 years ago. I saw one on eBay that sold for about $100 this year. There's a handful of them out there, but there's not very many. And in general, my experience with models is I think that my model collection, which I thought was going to be worth a fortune by now and be an inheritance for my grandchildren, they're worth about what they were retail originally. But I've given up on that. I'm just going to donate them to the center when I die. So, Walt Arfons comes back. He was having trouble getting up to speed. This is the brother who doesn't talk to Art. So he thought, I'll fix it. I'll get some JATO rockets. He strapped some JATOs. I don't think this is the right picture, but it's this car with some JATO rockets strapped on. USAC said, well, you can't control those from the cockpit, so we won't allow that car. It wouldn't go through scrutineering in effect. And so he's there. The picture is not exactly the right timing, but it's that car with JATO rockets. And so he had a good idea. Maybe he seemed like a good idea, but it didn't work for him. And October, we're getting late, the end of the season. So 65. Here he's back. He's built a new car. It looks like a torpedo. So you can only see about a dozen of JATOs in there. It actually holds 15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I think it holds 15. Yeah, 15. And new car, tremendous acceleration. Instead of using a few miles run up, you only use 9/10 of a mile run up. Well, there was a reason for that, because these rockets only lasted for 15 seconds. So the problem was he'd get up to a tremendous speed, and then the rockets had cut out, and then he was coasting for the rest of the way. So he claimed that he had got as fast as 500 miles an hour, but he only had a recorded speed of 247 for the mile. Now, one of the things is, when a lot of these claimed top speeds were airspeed. And it seems like at Bonneville, the airspeed readings, and if you're into aircraft, you probably understand this, the speed readings are high, are all 10 to 20 miles an hour high, but they're just not reliable in the context of what we're talking about. So only the timing from breaking timing lights is all that works. Now that's September, and he didn't get a decent speed. Breedlove shows up. He's got a new car, 4-wheeler. Now it's FIA, for what that's worth. And he's got a J79 engine, so that's the main thing. So he got up to 590 miles per hour. He claimed, but he timed at 518, and then the next time he got up to 534, but there was a lot of damage to the bodywork. This looked speed of sound, but it really wasn't. This was a really bad aerodynamic design. So he took it over to Salt Lake City to National Guard. I guess, is there an air part to National Guard? To an air base that was National Guard. And they worked on it, and they told the commanding officer some cock-a-bull story of what they were doing. And they worked on it and fixed the body, did a lot of fixing to the bodywork. Meanwhile, Walt Arfons, I should say, shows up, and in this picture you can see there's some rockets. So he strapped 10 more rockets. Somehow he satisfied USAC this year, but they went off. The rocket bottles started falling off. At least one of them pointed in the wrong direction, burned the car, and so on. But they were able to repair it. So on October 22nd, they had another run. And again, the rockets don't go long enough. So even if you stage them, it didn't work. So he got up to 476, but now we're over 500 is our target. So Walt says, leave it go. And I don't know what Walt did after that. Breedlove, now he's got his car modified. In this picture, maybe you can see the louvers over the wheels, and there's some dots. Those are holes along the roof where he's done it. You can see that the cowling at the jet engine's been replaced because only half of his name is there. So this is a correct picture with this. So he got up to 555, a new land speed record in Sonic 1. Now, okay, we're happy, right? It's November the 2nd. Season's over. Season's over. We've got the salt for a week. Art is down in Las Vegas just cooling his heels, ready to pounce. So I said, okay, Well, let's get my wife in the car. So he puts Lee in the car, and supposedly the PR said she'd never been over 75 miles an hour before in her life. Puts her in the car, so she does 308 miles per hour. So what they claim is a women's record. There's no such official thing, of course, but so she has the women's record. I don't think she does anymore. Well, that doesn't use up all the time. So they called Shelby up and said, well, can we borrow one of your Daytona coupes? So he ships it up, and Breedlove and Tatro, notice two different drivers for two different teams, right? But they're both Goodyear. So they get in the car, and they ran around in circles, 12 hours, 24 hours. Well, can you imagine what this is doing to the salt? So Art shows up and says, what the hell have you guys been doing? You've been screwing me up. You wrecked the salt. What can I do? So anyway, he goes out, and you can't look at that airspeed. He claimed he did 625 by airspeed. At any rate, he ends up with an average speed of 576, which is a new land speed record. So once again, Breedlove is screwed, right? Remember, this is November the 2nd, pretty late. He delays and delays, but November the 7th, Arfons is on. But Arfons, you know, his time runs out, and if you're not using it, then you lose it. So there's that Petrali giving Arfons his time. Now next week, or what is that, 2 days later, Firestone on November 7th, Firestone, they didn't have much Firestone on the car, but this is on Firestone's time. Summer shows up with a goldenrod. This is 4 Chrysler engines, does 409 average, which is a official speed record for wheel-driven cars. Again, it's not the same kind of thing, but yeah, there is everybody recognizes that is a official, there is such a record. So, Breedlove, November the 15th. You know, that was really lucky that he could keep going. But he's back on November the 15th, and he gets in the car, and he averages 600.601 miles per hour. That's it. So he's the first to ever reach 400, 500, and 600 miles per hour. So that's the end of the season finally. Breedlove's got the record. Art is out of luck. So, good. So, 66, Art comes back. He's tried to, he's had problems with the blowing the rear tires, too much loading on the rear. So he went to dual rear wheels, but that had added weight and drag. He was having trouble getting up to speed. November the 17th, he was probably doing well over 600 miles per hour. The right front wheel bearing broke. There's a massive crash at over 600 miles per hour. Car was destroyed, as you can see. Arfon survives. Amazingly, everybody driving up to the wreck. Nobody thought there was going to be any ambulance needed. There's another picture of the car. So that ends step number 1. And so I said I have a break, and this is the break. So I have 15 minutes of video that I'm going to show you after that, and that'll be it. What I've got here are 6 short clips, which I'm going to run through because I think they give you a feel for what it's like on the salt and the way that they hype these things. This first one is Mickey Thompson, 1960. This is off YouTube, so it's a little bit noisy.
The Bonneville Salt Flats lie some 120 miles west of Utah's Salt Lake City. The speed-minded know it well. None so well as Marion Mickey Thompson, who has been competing in different speed classes on the salt for the past 11 years. his ultimate goal has been the magic 400 mile per hour mark, reached by England's John Cobb in 1947. Thompson is a 32-year-old master mechanic from El Monte, California. He has competed in every form of automobile racing. Thompson's crew has been handpicked. Under the direction of Chief Mechanic Fritz Voigt, they came to Bonneville in 1960 uniquely qualified to make their attack on the 400 mile per hour mark. The Challenger weighs close to 7,000 pounds. It is powered by 4 supercharged Pontiac engines, each capable of delivering 750 horsepower. Challenger roared through the measured mile at 406.6 miles per hour and earned for Thompson the title of the world's fastest automotive driver. Minutes after Thompson's breathtaking feat, wire services and radio stations were pushing the news across an astonished nation. It would seem enough for any man, yet Thompson wants more. He is still intent on smashing the two-way record of 394 miles per hour set for the late John Cobb of England in 1947. An old man watching Thompson said, "You know, I believe that boy. He looks like speed."
Of course, remember that that was no record. It was only a one-way run. Now, what happened here? Oh, that didn't work. Okay, the next one, we're going to jump forward to 1964 to Campbell's speed record in Australia.
In Bluebird, Donald Campbell has set a new world record. And this was the scene at Lake Ayr when they were all set for the attempt. £2 million or more has gone into the jet-powered car and the preparations. And 70 British firms have contributed to the cost. But Lake Ayr proved difficult. Until the surface was leveled and dry, it would have been suicidal to attack the record. At last, everything's okay, and the man with the unique combination of courage, patience, and determination for the attempt receives the mascot from his wife, Tonya. It's a tense moment, but Donald Campbell has known many like it. The huge engine starts up. The rule is that 2 runs have to be made, one each way along the measured mile. To get up speed and slow down afterwards entails a run of about 15 miles. The first run was successful. Now Campbell hurtles over the Salt Flats in the reverse direction. To the joy of everybody, a new record was set at 403.1 miles an hour. In Bluebird,
seems to want to loop. Okay, the next one. This is still 64. This is remember that Campbell Breedlove had set his 407 in 63. So what you just saw was after Breedlove's Eyes the world record. Now Campbell's got an FIA record. Soon after, the same year, Breedlove is on the
513.33 in the mile and 519.49 in the kilometer. By increasing his power setting for the return run, Craig knows that he is within reach of an over 500 mile an hour record. What he doesn't know is that this is going to be the wildest ride of his life.
Moving out. He's on course, looking good. Here he comes, moving fast. He's past the 8 and really standing on it. He's looking good. came off of the car. He lost his chute. He lost his chute.
And he's going too fast for his brakes to hold. He's out of control.
He's in the 3, and he's not slowing down. He's approaching the 2. Man, he's really moving. He's past the 2. He's out of control. I see him coming. He's coming. He's moving right along. He's really pouring it on. Here he comes. He's getting close to the first line up to the motor approaching right now. Past the first line. Kenny's rolling. I'll roll down there.
Reunion await the crew.
If we try to miss the time on that, boy, he's out of business. I'm not doing it again. What a ride. Go for my next trick. You didn't make it. I'll set myself on fire. Greg, here's your dad. Oh, God. Hey, buddy, how you doing? I broke my razor. Everything's okay. What else did I go, Dad? Did we break the record, God darn? What was the time? What was the time? Somebody tell me how fast I went.
It was fast enough. His record, 526.28 miles per hour. Craig Breedlove is the first man to officially drive over 500 miles an hour on wheels. As also, he was the first man to set a Bonneville record of over 400 miles an hour. His second and almost disastrous run today became a 539.89 runaway, from which he incredibly escaped unharmed. With this sobering thought in mind, Craig and his crew returned to the course at a very safe 10 miles an hour.
Okay, now, 2 weeks later, Arfons is back with the Green Monster.
Out of the mile. 600 miles per hour. He releases his first parachute. It shreds away completely. 500 miles per hour. He's fighting for control. At 400 miles per hour, he releases his emergency chute. It shreds too, but half of it holds. At an estimated speed of over 600 miles an hour, Arthur Arfons miraculously brings the Green Monster to a safe stop. The crew, dedicated, loyal. The ones who believe in Arfons rush to his aid. None is necessary. He is safe. Emotion sweeps everyone. They laugh, and grown men cry. The speed is released for the second run. 559 miles per hour. Combine the first run of 515 miles an hour, it gives an average of 536.71 miles an hour. A new world land speed record. Today, Arthur Arfons is the fastest man in the world on wheels. As one of his crew so aptly said, most of us are pretty well ridiculed. People look on us as a bunch of fools. But there is a tremendous challenge and a tremendous sense of accomplishment when you prove them wrong. Arthur Arfons, Akron, Ohio. The man with the dream that came true. A man who answers well to himself. A man whose next challenge may be to break the sound barrier in an automobile. The fastest man on earth and the happiest.
So that's the new record. 536 isn't quite the 600 they were trumpeting in the middle of the video. And notice there's not a mention of Breedlove in his record of 2 weeks before. Okay, from there, we move forward to the next year, when Breedlove comes back with the four-wheeler and sets a new record.
This is a jet without wings. It rests now on 4 Goodyear tires. But soon, you will see it race across the salt flats of Bonneville and shatter the world's land speed record. For this is Craig Breedlove's car, the Spirit of America. Breedlove will drive it to a two-way average of over 600 miles per hour. At that speed, more than 100 tons of centrifugal force will try to rip each tire to pieces, unsuccessfully.
He's ready to go. He's ready to blast off.
Tested beyond the speed of sound. Helped Craig Breedlove set a new land speed record, 600.601 miles per hour. Goodyear, the fastest tires on earth.
Remember, this is all promotional stuff. So finally, the next year, 66, Arfons comes back with the Green Monster, ready to, he's convinced he can do faster than that. So he's set to do over 600 miles an hour.
Shortly after dawn on November 17th, the Green Monster moves down the long black line. Arfons lifts his foot off the brakes and switches on the afterburners. He's going for Breedlove's 600-mile-per-hour record and is determined to make a fast time. He heads through the mile over 580 and is still accelerating. A few hundred yards outside the markers, he becomes one of only 2 people to exceed 600 miles per hour on land. He's heading for a fast time. Suddenly, without warning, the car rears to the right. The monster starts to roll over and out of control. Not far from where the mangled wreck of the monster eventually comes to a halt is waiting the car of Ed Snyder, Art's closest friend and chief mechanic. It's the voice of a hysterical man.
Oh, my God. Oh, it's in every place. Oh, no.
I got down to it, well, I figured that he'd had it, going that speed.
Says when you get in there, you feel like, well, you've lived your life. And if something happens, it happens.
We got a bar and broke it loose and got him out. He was just laying there not moving or anything, and so I started hollering, and about that time he come to, and he says, Ed, and I said, yeah, and he says, I'm all right. So we got him in an airplane, got him to the hospital.
Can't give you all the details. I slept most of the time. The car almost cleared the measured mile, and I lost a spindle. The bearing froze up from lack of lubrication, and the wheel spindle and all came off. And the car dug in and flipped for 527 feet they measured before it hit again. And most of the car slid about a mile. And after it hit the first time, I don't remember nothing else. I come to a little bit when it was getting me out, and I'd go back out, just drifting in and out of consciousness. They started washing my eyes. It was packed with salt. When I got in, they flew me into the hospital, and they was doing it with Q-tips, and my face was cut up, and they was washing all this salt out, and boy, it stung like the devil. So I said, just let me get in the shower, and I'll wash it out in the shower.
They called me from the hospital. They said, it's unbelievable, he's in taking a shower. And I said, well, if he can take a shower, he can call me on the phone.
I believe I was in the hospital a day and a half, and I flew right back to Akron, and within a week I was back down to shop.
The Green Monster is scattered over a 4-mile area, but almostly Arfons talks of a new car and attempt.
I really don't know what drives me to Bonneville. It's a place that when you're out there, you can't stand it, you know, you wish you hadn't come. And every time I left on the way home, I was making plans when I was going back. It's something you just can't get away from.
Obviously, that car was wrecked and couldn't race it more. Firestone had pretty much lost interest in supporting any more land speed record attempts. So they weren't going to sponsor Arfons anymore. Goodyear was pretty happy with 600. They couldn't see anything to be gained in setting a record of 650, particularly when there was nobody else was attempting it. So Goodyear said to Breedlove, that's the end of the funding from us. Firestone the same, and so that was the end of that era. And it was there's only been, I think, three. There have only been three speed records set since that time, and the most recent one in '97. And that'll be it for today. Certainly.
How did Breedlove get out of that car with its nose down in the lake?
He popped the canopy. He undid the belts, and he swam out.
Oh, after it went in,
He was underwater. He was underwater. They didn't play up to how close the thing that was.
his hair was all combed and he was dry.
But they didn't play up. Well, that's Breedlove, I think, that he'd comb his hair, but it was under his helmet, right? But he came out from underwater. Yes.
Do you know anything about the new person that's going to try 1,000 miles an hour?
Well, it's actually Andy Green again. There are, I think, and I've got it right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I went to the website this morning and found a list of 7 different possible people who are attempting it. The most promising is the Bloodhound, which is really an extension of the British efforts from the Thrust 2 to the Thrust SSC, which was Andy Green, Andy Green is slated to be the driver of this. It's another one of those multi-million-dollar British efforts in that style. Any more questions? Bruce.
George, there seemed to be a big boost in speed from 61 and then about 63 and 4.
Well, I think they finally.
Was it just the power?
I think they finally got their act together. Those jet engines had so much power. They just had so much power that you figure Thompson gets out there and does 400, and with 4 Chryslers, no 4 Pontiacs, you get those jet engines had like multiples of the power.
Just seemed like a big boost.
Well, but it showed that Breedlove had, if he could get the rest of the act together, there was so much power, and of course there with Arfons, he had 3 times again as much power. You know, and now they've got even more. Yes, sir.
What's the current record? Where was it established? Was it a thrust motor?
It's a jet. It was 2 jets in a car called Thrust SC, supersonic, driven by Andy Green at Black Rock. And it's speed of sound. It's somebody said to me, it's west of Bonneville, so it's over sort of near Reno, somewhere over that direction. You know, Bad Day at Black Rock? Didn't you see the movie?
No.
I'm not exactly sure. It's not salt. It's a different kind, slightly different formation, but it's speed of sound. About 720, I think. Yes?
I'm just curious if Art Arfons and Craig Breedlove were friends.
Ever became, Breedlove and Arfons? Well, I quoted earlier that Art said to Breedlove that this is Russian roulette, and you can see that for Arfons, came pretty damn close. And for Breedlove, in fact, even earlier, that they were playing with death and they were pushing each other. My impression, and this is all secondhand, my impression is other than Walt and Art, where that was family, that was a personal family thing, I think these people, like competitors out here at the in the paddock at the Glen, they're all competitors. They're competitors, but they are all in the same business, and they all have common interests. And you know, you get them, you know, 100 meters away from the paddock, and they're friends. Get them down to the Seneca Lodge, and they sit and have dinner together. I think it was very much that way with Breedlove and Art. Yes.
Was Donald Campbell's car thrust or wheel driven?
It was a turbine.
Yeah,
which is like the cars that ran in Indianapolis,
okay,
like
so
the turbine cars that ran in Indianapolis. It'd be very similar to that. Yes.
I gotta defend what you were talking about, the FIA. I grew up listening to Donald Campbell is my hero, and Cobb, and these people. And although you talk about, you know, the amount of money they were spending, the difference was they were building cars to drive the wheels for the land speed record. Having a jet engine or a fighter plane, when all you were basically trying to do was keep it on the ground, which I know is not the way but that was the way it was reported in Britain, that the original rule was to have a car which drove the wheels, and that was the land speed record. Now, admittedly, they've now changed it, and of course the latest British car is, as you talk about, it's also a thrust, but that's why the money was involved, plus also British industry. And remember, after the war, they didn't have the money that this country had, so it had to come from industry. So there is a comparison. I'm not taking anything at all away from Breedlove or Arda, but it was a different type of race, different car.
Yeah, I tried to say one against the other. This is an American audience. And I'm speaking to an American audience. I have been trying to remember how I felt in the 1960s, in the early 60s about this. And I think most of us are road racing, got our start in road racing. And as Canadian in road racing, I read all the British magazines. So I'm kind of an Anglophile when it comes to racing, and I'm kind of on that Anglophile side.
Well, I'm not trying to take anything away from what you said, but it's interesting to hear the difference between being British and also being American.
Yeah,
and also having lived here.
To this day, the attitude towards the thrust projects and to the Bloodhound project in Britain is much different than here. Yeah. And it's a much different approach. But I'll tell you, anytime some guy can haul his car, like Thompson did, out to the flats behind his station wagon on a trailer, and Bess Campbell, who's got 50 vehicles on the Salt, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. Just like the BRM project was embarrassing. I'm not old enough to remember that from the day, but I certainly, I'm enough of a historian of Formula One to know how embarrassing that BRM project was.
I just got to finish to say,
Yeah.
I was at Silverstone when they were trying to run the BRM and it never came by.
But it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. And had they not blown their horns so much, but you saw the newsreel, like man, newsreel, you would never know that Bonneville even ever existed.
Was that the H16?
Yes. No, not the H16. Oh, okay. This was a it was a 16. It was a V16 from 1950. It was try to match the old 4.5 liter, 1.5 liter supercharged. It was a 1.5 liter supercharged. Was it the 16?
Yes.
Was it a 16? The BRM, the old BRM. Yeah. So this. Oh no, this was back when it was the same as this. It was all those companies come in and poured in a tremendous amount of money, and I don't know if you're. It's also a matter of politics, the way you do things. That it's kind of like a government, even though it's industry, it's kind of a government socialistic kind of thing, what they did in Britain. And here it's free enterprise, the little guy with his hot rod. I'm in the middle on that. I see both sides of it myself. Any more questions before we call it a day? All right, thank you very much.
George, thank you. Great storytelling.